Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tracing the incredible stepping stones of India's transformation from absolute British rule all the way to becoming the world's largest democracy. It's an absolutely massive story of power, resistance, and the meticulous drafting of laws that literally forged a nation. Let's get right into it. So, how exactly do you build the world's largest democracy out of an empire? Well, a democracy of over a billion people doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's built layer by layer, statute by statute, through decades of really intense struggle and compromise. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how that monumental shift actually went down. We've got a complete roadmap ahead of us today. It lays out exactly how a century of complex legal history unfolds into 5 distinct eras. We're starting out with a crown rule back in 1858 and going all the way down to a post-independence democratic India. We'll use this timeline to chop a massive historical transformation into bite-sized, easily digestible pieces. On the agenda today, first, the crown takes control. Second, a taste of representation. Third, decentralization and diarchy. Fourth, the final steps forward. And fifth, the birth of a republic.
Starting with Part 1, the Crown takes control, the 1858 shift to absolute power. Right after the massive upheaval of the 1857 revolt, which you probably know as the First War of Independence, the British Parliament stepped in and dramatically centralized power with the Government of India Act of 1858. India was now governed directly by and in the name of His Majesty. The Governor-General actually got an upgrade to Viceroy of India, becoming the direct representative of the Crown, with Lord Canning stepping in as the first to hold the title. This act also totally scrapped the old, kind of messy double government system, abolishing the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. In their place, a brand new office, the Secretary of State for India, who had complete, unchecked authority over the administration.
But alongside this hardcore administrative shift, there was a bit of a PR campaign. The Queen's proclamation in November 1858 was essentially issued to calm things down. It promised Indians equal treatment, protection of their rights, and a strict policy of non-interference in religion. So it was basically an attempt to stabilize British rule by reassuring the public, even as they were tightening their grip behind the scenes. Moving right along to Part 2, a taste of representation. This was the struggle for a voice between 1861 and 1909.
We really see this struggle play out through the Indian Council Acts. It's a slow, super reluctant yielding of representation. Step 1, the 1861 Act. This was the absolute beginning of representative institutions, with the Viceroy nominating just 3 Indians as non-official members. Decades go by, and we hit Step 2, the 1892 Act, which gave legislative councils the incredibly limited power to just discuss the budget. Then finally, Step 3, the 1909 Act, often called the Morley-Minto Reforms. This increased council sizes and allowed for a limited elected representation, introducing the whole concept of separate electorates.
Now here is the absolute key takeaway. While the doors of representation were slightly cracked open over nearly 50 years, real governing power remained firmly out of Indian hands. Sure, they could sit in the room and eventually they could even speak, but they were a long, long way from actually steering the ship. Which brings us to Part 3, decentralization and diarchy. We start seeing cracks in absolute control from 1919 to 1935. With the Government of India Act of 1919, the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, the stated goal officially became the gradual introduction of responsible government. The absolute control was finally fracturing. But to really grasp this decentralization, we have to talk about a slightly clunky concept called diarchy. Introduced in 1919, this system basically split provincial responsibilities right down the middle into 2 categories, reserved and transferred. The divide here was pretty stark. On one side, the reserved subjects. These were the critical, heavy-hitting areas of government kept firmly locked down by the British governor and his unelected officials. On the other side, the transferred subjects. These were handed over to elected Indian ministers who were actually accountable to the legislature. It was this wild dual system where the British kept the most vital powers for themselves while tossing secondary responsibilities over to the Indian representatives. On to Part 4, the final steps forward. This covers the final push towards independence from 1935 to 1947. The dam of British control finally breaks with the Government of India Act of 1935. This was a massive, massive milestone. It totally abolished that awkward diarchy system and brought in true provincial autonomy by 1937. It was so foundational that it set up institutions that literally still run India today, like the Federal Court and the Reserve Bank of India. It also provided for a public service commission and officially separated Burma from India. It was a highly detailed legal framework that essentially served as the architectural blueprint for the country's future. From there, the dominoes fall fast. On July 18, 1947, the Indian Independence Act passes, legally providing for the partition into India and Pakistan. Less than a month later, August 15, 1947, British rule officially ends, creating a sovereign India. And just a few years later, January 26, 1950, India takes its destiny fully into its own hands as the Constitution formally comes into effect.
And that leads us perfectly into Part 5, Birth of a Republic, Post-Independence Democratic India. The developments here are just extraordinary when you look back at everything we've just covered. On January 26, 1950, the nation successfully transforms into a democratic republic. It establishes a modern bicameral parliament with the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. But honestly, the biggest deal? After almost a century of agonizingly slow concessions for mere representation, the new republic made a staggering leap. It granted universal adult franchise. Every single adult citizen finally had a real voice and a vote.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. How do these century-long legislative compromises shape the modern Indian governance you see today? Think about it. From the strict oversight of the 1858 Crown Rule, to the messy power sharing of diarchy, to the massive frameworks of the 1935 Act, the institutions, the legal structures, the absolute value placed on a universal vote, none of it happened by accident. It was all born from this exact hard-fought journey. Keep that in mind the next time you see the world's largest democracy at work. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you in the next one.